It's now time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The mood is growing for better Seoul-Tokyo relations, which hit their lowest point in recent decades when long-standing historical disputes degenerated into a trade and diplomatic conflict between the two neighbours. But with a new government in Seoul and a new leader in Japan as well as of last year, the relationship has started to mend again, beginning with efforts to resume regular talks on areas of shared security interests. South Korea's new Yoon Suk-yeol administration has appointed foreign policy experts, including Foreign Minister Park Jin, who studied in Japan, and Yun Duk-min as a Japan specialist as the pick for ambassador to Tokyo. So we discuss where Seoul-Tokyo ties are headed with these recent developments, and for this I'm joined by Eun-jung, Professor of International Relations at Kongju National University, and Yoshihide SOEYA, Professor Emeritus of Keio University. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. And well, my first question to you, Professor Im. Now, South Korea has named a new ambassador to Japan, Yoon Duk-min, and of course, he's a Japan specialist, as we know. And well, what do you really know about Mr. Yoon, and how do you think he's going to handle relations with Japan?
Well, Dr. Yoon is a graduate from actually SOEYA Sensei's University, Keio University. He earned his doctoral degree from the Keio University, and he's a true academic. He has been a professor, and he was the head of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy for several years during the Park Geun-hye administration. So he has been known as, again, more true academic. Again, the expert of course, Japan, and then general security issues as well. So I feel like, of course, his predecessor, the Ambassador Kang Chang-il, when he was appointed as the ambassador to Japan, there were kind of expectations, of course, because he is more very familiar politician to the Japanese inner circle as well. But as long as the relationship between the Tokyo and Seoul was chilled that much, even the pretty powerful, influential politician like Ambassador Kang, there were not that many options, even for, again, the Mr. Kang. So this time, I feel like, of course, the mood is changing, and Professor Yoon, again, the new ambassador, can be a good messenger between the Tokyo, Seoul, and Tokyo.
Professor SOEYA, I wonder what you make of this, the recent developments that we've seen, this reignition of South Korea-Japan ties. How is the Yoon government being perceived in Japan right now by the Kishida government?
I think those people who are watching the relationship for the past years, I think essentially welcome the coming of President Yoon as the top leader of South Korea. And I think chemistry between Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and President Yoon should be good, I think at the fundamental level. And so I think conditions are there for us to begin to think a new start of the relationship.
And Professor SOEYA, would you see the appointment of the new ambassador, Mr. Yoon, as a positive step towards that front?
Yes, of course. Well, in fact, he's been a long-term a good friend of mine since his graduate days at Keio, my alma mater. And of course, he's not only Japan specialist. I mean, he's been watching North Korea, Korean Peninsula, and issues beyond. So he's not Japan specific, specialist. I think which is very good for the relationship, because the relationship between us should grow much bigger. I mean, not limited to the bilateral relationship, nor just Northeast Asian context, but I think our relationship should go beyond, in fact, region-wide and globally. And from that point of view as well, I think coming Ambassador Yoon should play a great role.
Right, so we can really see...
Sorry. Yes, okay.
Right, we can see them really cementing that very firm foundation to really advance in Seoul-Tokyo relations. And Professor Lim, now, as key US allies, how do you see South Korea and Japan working together in terms of security, which has, of course, been the top issue especially nowadays with North Korea and its provocations?
Well, again, the cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo should have been much more than the current level, because North Korea's as we see, I mean, specifically this year, their oldest missile tests, their provocations, the level is simply very outrageous. It's just beyond any past. So having had that kind of real immediate, urgent challenges, threats from the North. Again, the South Korea alone, of course, we do have a very modernized, very capable military, but, we alone, we cannot just have enough deterrence capacity, where we, again, our capacity might not be really enough, again, to face all this, outrageous challenges. So partnership, of course, ROK-US alliance is the most important, but not only just ROK-US alliance, we need more partners and friends, like-minded countries who can support our security. So definitely Japan is the closest neighbor, and we do share many important values, even though we do have, of course, many difficult issues, such as, again, the historical issues, but as long as we are neighbors, and as long as we share the similar value, I think more cooperation should have been made. But now I don't want to think it's too late. Definitely, I think we can again, how would you say, strengthen the already existing partnership between the two.
And same question goes to you, Professor SOEYA. How can Seoul and Tokyo really strengthen their cooperation in handling the threat from North Korea, such as, deepening their military intelligence sharing, for instance, and also the previous Moon government wasn't very receptive to Japan seeking, really addressing the issue of its adopted nationals in North Korea. But do you think the Yoon government will be more receptive to that?
Well, the answer is definitely yes. And I think in our relationship, there are both, of course, problems and common interests and shared interests. And I tend to look at the structure of this as an issue of giving priorities. Which do you prioritize? And I think previous administrations in both Seoul and Tokyo have tended to prioritize problems, history issues first. And so that's, I think, the reason why we could not go much deeper into actual cooperation. And I think the order of priority, it should be very different under the current administrations in both, again, Seoul and Tokyo. So I think that's a very good thing, overall. And so common interests, shared issues, of course, include first and foremost the North Korean problem. And as I said previously, our common interests should go beyond. And as I was looking at U.S. show previous and prior to this dialogue, and South Korean deeper engagement in Ukraine, and also NATO and EU, I think that's a very good thing for the current Yoon Suk-yeol government. And of course, as you know, Japan has also been very active. And so there is room of cooperation and collaboration between our countries, regarding those global issues as well. And so prioritizing history, on top of, before all these common interests, I think is a wrong thing to do for both governments. But the good sign is that's not the situation today between Seoul and Tokyo.
Right, so rather than prioritizing problems, as you said, really focusing on the challenges that are very imminent and facing them directly. And Professor Im, now, what is the probability of President Yoon and Prime Minister Yoshihide meeting at the NATO summit this month? I mean, if they do, what agendas do you think they're going to really prioritize?
Well, I think the probability, if you ask me the probability, I will say, it's pretty reasonably high, or it can be likely, because, NATO, of course, some critics will say that, again, the NATO's expansion was really provocating the Russia, and it was one good reason for the current, again, the Russia-Ukraine war. But again, of course, there are that kind of critical voices as well. But NATO has been actually evolving. Its function has been evolving, and as I mentioned earlier, Korea needs actually more partner, because if you think about all the stalemate situation in this region, in East Asia, again, China actually should have done more actually to deal with the oldest North Korean issues. So of course, China will be criticizing U.S. and they'll be criticizing even us. But again, China is actually the most influential country, which has the largest leverage vis-a-vis the North. But as long as we have all this kind of stalemate situations here in this region, again, we want to break through. We want to break through all the stalemate situations, which means, again, that we need more partner. So in that sense, again, the NATO can be all these European countries who have like-minded countries in Europe. They can be, I think, good partners to deal with all this, difficult issue. So not only just, those military threat, economically too, all this, global supply chain really faces a huge challenge. Well, this some will say that this block, making a block in the separate regions is a kind of threat to the global economy. One sense that's true, but at the same time, again, we also need to be flexible and resilient with all this changing trends. So definitely, again, the European countries, again, I think Korea need more, again, the more cooperation with the European countries too. So having said that, again, the Korea-Japan, beyond just bilateral issues, again, we need to think about more comprehensive general agenda together with the European partner as well. I can agree more with SOEYA Sensei's earlier comments about the prospect of the Korea-Japan relations.
So at this point, it looks like South Korea and Japan share more commonalities than differences, and in most cases, they're speaking with one voice, especially on very important global issues. And well, Professor SOEYA, now the fact of the matter is, though, that there still are very steep historical differences between the two countries. Sure. And well, in terms of dealing with them, are they manageable? Like, how should such issues be pursued by the two governments?
Well, having said what all I did, that doesn't mean that our problems are not important. Yeah, they are important. And so it's a matter of prioritizing, as I said. But the prioritizing would mean that, even though we prioritize working together on global, regional, and other issues, but simultaneously, we have to continue to talk about and negotiate about these problems. And one biggest flaw in the previous period was there was no diplomacy functioning. I mean, diplomacy was defunct, almost non-existent over these issues. So the first thing to do is to establish some channel, to begin to talk and negotiate over these issues and put everything on the table and have frank discussions. And doing that, of course, is not easy on both sides because these issues are perhaps first and foremost domestic problems. I mean, there is a deep domestic division, chasm between different camps. And so managing this issue is I think, first and foremost, is a domestic problem. And so bilateral relationship has been suffering from, this structural sort of unfortunate reality. But in order to overcome this, I mean, unless two sides talk, you cannot deal with domestic, context. And so therefore, if this is a matter of prioritizing, I mean, you should prioritize bilateral talks, diplomatic, contact, and then dealing with domestic context from that point of view.
Right, so we have seen that the matter of bilateral ties, it's been strongly political on both sides for many years, and hopefully we'll see some real, very genuine, frank diplomacy bridge over those political differences. And Professor SOEYA, before we go now, Prime Minister Kishida, he has some key events coming up, the upper house elections this year. And do you think he's going to be able to focus on improving Seoul-Tokyo ties ahead of that? Or do you think we're going to see more progress after next month?
Well, Kishida has been moving very carefully towards the upper house election. And because it's a matter of domestic politics, first and foremost, before going to national elections. And so he has been compromising his beliefs in the complex domestic context. I think that's what we are seeing. And so I think many people should agree that upcoming upper house elections should be the critical turning point. And unless Kishida begins to do something different, than what he has been doing now, I think things would not be that promising. But I think he is now maneuvering through domestic difficult processes, and that's why some of his actions may look as though it's giving in to some conservative pressures. But I think from his point of view, it's a compromise. So prior to the election, I think it's not easy to expect some breakthrough moves coming from him. So the important stage should be after the elections.
Well, it seems that the roadmap is pretty clear. The two neighbours are going to have to really build and strengthen their relations. And Rob, I'm afraid this is where we have to end the interview today due to time, but that was Eun-jung, Professor of International Relations at Kongju National University, and Yoshihide SOEYA, Professor Emeritus of Keio University. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.